Hello everyone, I'm so glad you could join me for another delicious recipe, this time inspired by a recent trip to Puglia, way in the south of Italy. Now, when we visited Lecce, just to give you a little backstory, we had a chance to visit behind the scenes at Martinucci Bakery, which is famous, and they make thousands of these pastries. Well, while we came for the pasticciotti, we stayed for the dolcetti di mandorle, these almond sweets, which look like an amaretti, but don't let that fool you. They are crunchy on the outside, but soft on the inside and absolutely decadent. When we were touring the bakery, we were watching different recipes get prepared. We saw cakes being assembled, the famous pasticciotti were being assembled, even savory rosticci. But there was a cooling rack off to the side that caught my eye, and on it were thousands of these little piped cookies. I was allowed to taste one right on the bakery floor, and I was expecting a hard crunchy cookie, and wasn't I pleasantly surprised by this soft almond cookie, and it had a coffee flavor. So that's the recipe I'm recreating right here from beautiful southern Puglia, dolcetti di mandorle. And it's relatively easy to make. It has common ingredients to the French macaron without any of the challenges. The first thing I'm going to do is take a couple of egg whites. It is important that your egg whites are at room temperature. That way your sugar will dissolve quickly into it when you start mixing it. And before you do anything, you want to lighten your egg whites by hand by giving them a little whisk until they're frothy. You're not making a meringue, just lightening them up a little bit, giving them a bit of volume. There we go. And now the rest is super simple. Then I add the next two key ingredients, icing sugar. And using this much icing sugar is key to a cookie that is nice and soft in the center. The first time I was playing with this recipe, I didn't have enough sugar, and they came out exactly like amaretti biscuits, too crispy. And I'm adding ground almonds. And I add both at once. You don't need to dissolve the icing sugar in first. What may be surprising to you is how stiff this batter. This is actually quite a dry, dense batter once you get it assembled. Before I get too far along, let me add my remaining two ingredients. 4 teaspoons of espresso powder. Espresso powder is a lot finer than instant coffee grounds, and it adds that intense coffee flavor. If you wanted just a plain cookie, you could leave the coffee out or use any of your favorite extracts. Just a tiny bit of salt to balance that sweetness. As the icing sugar dissolves into the egg whites, it forms a very thick paste. There we go. So it really looks like a cookie dough as opposed to a batter. Nothing like French macaron in its light, airy consistency. So once it comes together, I like to use a cutting board to divide the cookies. Just gonna work in the espresso powder just a little bit more. If you find the dough starts getting a little sticky to the touch, have a little dish with water nearby and you can wet your hands, and it makes it easier to handle. So knowing this dough makes 3 dozen cookies, I'll divide it into thirds, and then I'll cut each of those thirds into half, so I have 6. And you can probably figure out the math from here. But I find it's a lot easier than starting at one end of the dough and you make one size and then you don't get the appropriate yield. Each of these gets divided in half. And then finishing off with each of those getting cut into 3 gives me 36. Now it's time to shape the cookies into simple little round balls. So I'll wet my hands again, not too much. Because of the quantity of sugar in them, they do spread a little bit when they bake, but not too much. To finish each cookie off, I'll take an espresso coffee bean and just press it right in the center. And this does stay in place as it bakes. To bake these dolcetti, you need a low temperature oven, so it's preheated to 300 degrees, and you give them about 15 to 18 minutes. That way, you develop a nice, thin crust on the outside. There's a little bit of a crackle you get to each cookie, but the center will stay nice and soft. After I've taken my dolcetti out of the oven, I let them cool completely on the tray. They're very fragile when they're warm, but then once they've cooled, they're so easy to handle. And you know what I've discovered? If you pack them in an airtight container, they'll keep for up to 2 weeks, still crunchy on the outside and soft in the center. Great for the holiday cookie tin if you're thinking that direction. Oh, so delectable. So much easier to make than a macaron, yet all the characteristics. And with the added espresso in this cookie, ooh, we can see it's chewy. Super chewy. It's almost as much like a candy as it is a cookie. These are so easy to make, simple ingredients, and I hope I've given you all the tools and tips you need so you can make them at home. Let's dream of Italy together and make delicious dolcetti di mandorle. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you again for another delicious recipe.